Hi, welcome to the 2020 West Coast Chinese Christian Conference seminar on ethics. I'm Dr. Eric Liang. In this next hour, we shall be covering the following topics. Basically, I'll be giving you a whirlwind tour on what this entire topic of ethics is about, and we shall look at a few very relevant case studies, which I think would be generating a lot of interest as we enter into the third decade of the 21st century. So very briefly, we shall be talking about the definition of ethics and my fundamental assertion that one of the particular models of how we approach ethics should be most applicable for Christians. And then we shall be looking at three different case studies on abortion, on the so-called LGBTQ plus agenda, and on the big interrelated topic of globalism, socialism, liberalism, capitalism, and how all these things are getting played out in new and very unique ways as we stepped off the year 2020 and into the year 2021. After that, hopefully we shall have plenty of time for you to ask questions, and I look forward to a very engaged discussion with you. So first of all, let us look at the definition of ethics. The Greek word ethos simply refers to the manners of life and of conduct. Of course, especially the Greek philosophers back in 2000 to 2500 years ago, they have a very set framework for looking into the matter of ethics. The Greeks, as you may know, have an intense interest in the topic of philosophy. It has created and nurtured a huge number of very, very influential philosophers. Largely speaking, philosophy can be further subdivided into three subdisciplines. The disciplines of epistemology, which is about knowledge, how we know, how do we know, and how do we know that we know. That is the topic of study for epistemology. The second area of philosophy, generally speaking, is about metaphysics or ontology. That is a study about the nature of being, the fact that we exist, the fact that we are conscious of our existence. What does existence mean? How do this universe come about? What is the significance of the fact that we are not existing on this earth? All these are questions of metaphysics. And then the third and perhaps the more pragmatic sub-branch of philosophy is that of ethics, about morals. Does moral exist? Where do moral standards come from? How do we apply morals in this world? And that is the topic of ethics, and that is the topic we are talking about today. Now, the exercise of moral duty. I think we simply go without spending too much time in explanation as to the fact that morality is not a private matter. Don't believe what some of the liberal media tries to persuade you. That yes, morality may exist, but let's keep it a private thing. Don't try to quote unquote impose your morality onto somebody else, and much less try to legislate morality. Well, all of that is just bogus. That's all nonsense. By definition, morality affects the benefits of course, ourselves, but most of all, it affects the benefits, the well-being of our fellow human beings who live around us. Humans are social animals. We live in a society. Whatever we do has an impact on somebody else living next door and even living 10,000 miles away. So by definition, morality cannot be a private matter. It can, and indeed, I assert that it must be imposed on others. And the way of imposing on others needs to be regulated. Since we live in countries with governments, with the rules of law, the best way for us to impose our moral standards on the overall society in an orderly as well as in a well-controlled, in a fair and balanced way on each other, not just my imposing my morality on you or you imposing your morality on me, but we all debate and agree on a set of moral standards and we try to implement in society. The best way of doing that is indeed by way of legislation, by the rule of law. So yes, we not only can we legislate morality, we have to legislate morality, and in fact, all modern day laws are based on some moral standards. So don't ever believe people when they tell you that you are not supposed to legislate morality. Now, my so-called assertion on this slide actually is referring to this third bullet point, and that is we hold values, certain values, to be self-evident and universal. These are two very important key adjectives. It's self-evident. It is so obvious that certain things are good and certain things are bad. We do not need to spend a ton of time debating whether it is good or bad. It seems like every human being, every decent human being who come together would generally agree to a set of moral standards. That's why we call them self-evident. It's just in us. We are born with it. It comes as naturally, as part of human nature. As if we are hungry, we need to eat. We are thirsty, we need to drink. We are moral beings. Therefore, we need to exercise morality. And furthermore, we assert that to a large extent, there exists a set of moral values that are universal. In other words, they are not different from country to country, from nation to nation, from tribe to tribe, from village to village. They do not change. There may be some slight ways of expressing them. There may be some disagreements on where to set certain thresholds as to whether we should punish or not punish, how to punish, and so on. But in general, we believe that there's a set of moral values that are universal. For example, I think we can boldly assert that love is a universal good moral value. Honesty is universally regarded as better than dishonesty. Fairness is universally regarded as a good thing. It's good for human society, and so on and so forth. Okay, now, so if you open up any Christian or even non-Christian textbooks on ethics, they usually will spend the first few chapters describing to you what are the different approaches to deciding moral standards and whether certain models. For example, there are certain philosophies that assert that there's no such thing as a universal moral values. Every local community has different moral standards. I already said that I do not believe that's correct. As Christians, and I do not want to spend a whole lot of time in this 1 hour seminar to how to defend that position. I'll simply take it for granted that there are ethical standards that are universal. But still, even within that framework that we believe that are universal ethical standards, there are some slightly different models. The particular model that we believe is the most biblical one is the so-called hierarchical model of ethics. Let us take a look what that means. The hierarchical model of ethics asserts that yes, there are different moral values which are universal, but on occasion they may conflict. And when they do conflict, what do we do about that? And we shall again be looking at examples. Well, the hierarchical model says that not all moral values are equally valuable. And so in the rare cases, rare situations in life when different moral values seems to conflict with one another, we have to carefully examine and determine which one takes precedence over the other one. And so we should intentionally, voluntarily, and for the good of upholding morality, violate one of the two conflicting ethical principles. Now, this hierarchical model of ethics differs from a couple of very similar sounding ones. First of all, it differs from something called the ideal absolutism model of ethics. The ideal absolutism model stipulates that certain actions, such as lying, are always wrong, no matter under what kind of circumstances. If you lie, then it's wrong. But the hierarchical model says slightly different. It says that when the norms, the ethical norms conflict, we should take the one which is intrinsically of higher value. So in other words, there are certain special circumstances under which lying could be the right thing to do, because that would facilitate the fulfillment of another higher value, another higher ethical standard, such as the saving of lives. So if the saving of life, which is a very important ethical value, conflicts with the principle of not lying, which is also important but not as important as the first one, when these two principles conflict with one another, we have no choice. We have to pick one of the two, and the hierarchical model says that we have to pick the one of the higher value, which is that of saving lives. In that case, lying is not wrong. The hierarchical model also conflicts with something which you may have heard of called situationism. Now, the model of situationism stipulates that there is only one universal norm. For example, love. No matter what you do, everywhere you go, there's only one universal norm. Nothing else matters in comparison. Well, we also happen to disagree with that model. We assert that in fact there are many different norms, all of which are universal in their respective areas. So when one or more of these different norms come into conflict with one another, it depends on the area that we are trying to exercise this ethical standard in, and within the particular context of that sub-area, then we can tell that that particular ethical principle takes on higher value than the other one. Situationism denies that. Situationism says that no, don't worry about the different contexts. There's only one universally highest norm, and that is love. We disagree with that. It is not love that is always the trump card that trumps all the other ethical situations, all the other ethical values. Okay, now, so by this time you may be wondering, if there are many different universal norms and they have different values, they form a hierarchy. Can you give us some examples of how one ethics is of a higher rank than another? Here it is. First of all, persons, and by the way, this is not a complete set of hierarchy. I selected some of the more important principles. And these are all in the perhaps one of the most important ethics book ever written in the Christian literature, and that is a book called simply Ethics by a contemporary evangelical theologian, Norm Geisler. Okay, and if you want to go deeper after this seminar into studying topics, I strongly recommend this for you to use as your primary textbook. Okay, so Norm Geisler listed in his book a set of hierarchical ethical values, and here's a subset. First of all, persons are more valuable than things. That should not be too difficult for us to grasp, to comprehend. Of course, it is more important to save a person than to save a diamond ring, than to save a car. So if I had to choose between the two, of course I'll go for the human, right? So if somebody is holding onto a very, very precious jewelry stone and she falls into the water, and that precious stone is just too heavy for us to save both her and the jewelry stone. Which one will you choose? Of course, you choose the human life, right? Not the precious stone, no matter how costly that happens to be. Persons are more valuable than things. A Bible verse which you may all be familiar with is Matthew 12:3-7. Matthew 12:3-7, of course, has the background of Jesus debating with the Pharisees when the Pharisees accused Jesus' disciples of breaking the Sabbath by picking the grain from the field when they were walking through the field during Sabbath. By picking the grain and eat, they have broken the law. So Jesus used the example of David King David getting in the temple, and he was hungry, and not only did he ate from the temple, he ate the showbread from the temple, and only the priests are supposed to be able to eat it. And Jesus rebuked the Pharisees, saying that, have you not read in the law that on Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and ate innocent? But I say to you that something greater than the temple is here. So in fact, Jesus here is also alluding to the second bullet point which we have, and that is the infinite person, i.e. God himself. Jesus himself is more valuable than the finite persons. So on one hand, yes, observing the Sabbath is important, but a value that is even higher than observing the Sabbath is for mercy, for the benefit of the human being. The Sabbath is made for man, man is not made for Sabbath. But on top of that, higher still is the value that obeying God. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, obeying God, that is of an even higher value. Similarly, Jesus said in Matthew 23:23, there Jesus said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law. So there you go. Jesus explicitly said that even within the law, there are weightier provisions and less weighty provisions. And that is clearly stated the hierarchical model. So second principle, I already said, infinite person, i.e. obeying God, is more important than obeying the regulations, the man-made expositions of the Mosaic law. In Matthew 10, let me turn to Matthew 10, 37 to 39, is a phrase that a verse that you are very, very familiar with. And he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son and daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Loving your siblings, loving your parents, of course, is extremely valuable. But in case that actually conflicts with God's command for us to love Him, love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength, that takes even precedence over loving your parents. Third bullet, which is a little bit more controversial because obviously it has applications in some extreme cases of abortion, and that is an actual person should be considered more valuable than a potential person. We'll go back to that later. A fourth principle, many persons are more valuable than a few persons. Remember the story of Jonah? And God sent Jonah to spread the gospel to the Ninevites, and the entire city repented. And Jonah was really mad about it because the Assyrians living in Nineveh, they were brutal conquerors. They were really mean and nasty towards the Jews. And now Jonah was forced basically by God to go there and spread the gospel, and the Ninevites repented, and Jonah was unhappy. And so he walked out of the city walls, sat down on a little hill looking down on the big city, and was throwing a temper tantrum. And God said to Jonah, well, don't you know that there are tens and thousands of people living in this city? Even little children, there are tens and thousands of them. And shouldn't you be happy that they are repenting and turning to God? Why are you angry at that city? And why are you angry at me? The implication of that comment from God is that a lot of people in the city, in the big city, is important. So yes, it is important. Every person is important to God. But if you have an opportunity to do the maximum good to a lot of people, do it. Okay, so let me explain to you two overarching operating principles when we try to apply ethics. First is the principle of stewardship. In other words, keep in mind, no matter what we do in this life, we are but stewards of God. God has entrusted to us all kinds of resources, be it natural resources, be it human resources, be it family relationships, which are the most precious resources, be it our own time, our own education, our own talents. These are all things that God has entrusted to us. And we do not own them. We are just the stewards. So we have to take good care of them, like in the parable of the 10 talents in Matthew 25. We should manage these resources with the best intentions. We should indeed do careful calculations how to, quote unquote, maximize the return for our master. Make the best use of these things. We should not be lazy. We should not bury our talents or whatever God has entrusted to us, our capital, just for safety's sake, bury in the ground or be lazy. No. The fact that our master has entrusted these things to us is intending for us to go and use them, invest them, capitalize on them, make the best of it, sometimes taking calculated, reasonable risks, but all for the purpose of maximizing the return for God's kingdom. And remember, it is for the benefit of the master, it's not for our own benefit. Okay? So even when we apply ethics, when we legislate morality, when we exercise morality, we should keep the same thing in mind. Our intention is to maximize the good for all of mankind, maximize the good for all of the kingdom of God. Second principle, the principle of separation of ethical domains. I'm sure all of us have been confronted with this very classic dilemma, and that is God versus Caesar. Let us turn to our passage, Mark 12, 16 to 17. There, the Pharisees and the Herodians were trying to trap Jesus by asking him this question. They said, Master, is it lawful to pay a poll tax to Caesar? Now, of all the different kinds of taxes that the Romans imposed on the Jews, the most hated one was the poll tax, because it's literally assessing a tax on the individual human beings, right? It's not like the temple tax, where it's assessed on a annual basis for the sake of operating the temple or any other kinds of commercial taxation. This is a poll tax. In other words, a human being taxed just for the sake of being a human, being a Jew, you're being taxed on. So the Jews really hated this. But they knew that if Jesus were to say that no, it is not lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, then they have a reason to report Jesus to the Roman authorities, and it's punishable even by death, right? Because it is treason against the Roman Empire. So Jesus, in all his wisdom, told the Pharisees to pick up a coin. A Roman coin, as you know, a denarii, has the image of Caesar carved on it. And the Romans knew full well that this implies more than just a coin that is official, that's government minted. But the fact that they put Caesar's image on a coin is precisely because they, at that time in Roman history, they were already treating Caesar as a god, as their god, as the national god. And they are giving the status of divinity to Caesar, which is, of course, absolutely unacceptable to the Jews, who are monotheistic. So they thought they got Jesus truly trapped. No matter how Jesus answered, he would be in deep, deep trouble. But Jesus said, look at this coin. Whose image is on it? And of course, it is Caesar's image. It implies Caesar owns this coin. And Jesus said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Or to be more exact, Jesus was saying that render to Caesar the things which has Caesar's image on it, and render to God the things which have God's image on. Now, let me ask you, what are the things that have God's image printed on? Genesis 1, right? Genesis 1 said that when God created man, God created man in the image of God. And that's why we have this special characteristic, a special attribute, that there are certain godly attributes that are actually communicable to us. The attribute of being able to love, the attribute of being able to exercise true free will, the attribute of being able to relate to God spiritually. All these are godly attributes that are communicable to a human being. and it's only to human beings, not even to angels. Some of these privileges that we are enjoying as humans are not equally being enjoyable by angels. Now that does not mean that we have all of the attributes of God. There are many attributes of God that are not communicable to us, such as God's infinity, God's the Trinity of God, the triunity of God, God's omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience. Those are God only attributes. But certain other attributes, such as the ability to love, faithfulness, these are communicable to human beings. Okay, so we have the image of God in us. Every human does. That's why we yearn for God. That's why we can communicate and can relate to God. That is a sure sign that we are supposed to belong to God and to God only. In fact, our God is a jealous God. We're not supposed to split our loyalty between God and anybody else, whether it be Caesars or any other idols. But no worries. Jesus is saying that the domains are clear and separate. There are certain things in this world that are indeed owned by Caesar, such as this coin. It came from the government bureaucracy. They generated this coin. They put Caesar's image on it. Sure, since it belongs to Caesar, you give it back to Caesar. But your the humanity, your moral being, your soul, your spirit, they belong to God. You better not surrender them to Caesar. Okay, so there we clearly see a distinction, a delineation between two different domains. And once we think it through it carefully and apply it to all different areas of life, we will see that there's in fact no conflict. We can obey our government, even a secular government, even an ungodly government, even sometimes an immoral government to a certain extent for the purpose of the maximizing the good for all mankind. Maybe we can even submit to them, provided we do not surrender what rightly belongs to God, that is our soul, our spirit. We cannot bow to Caesar. Right? We can, if we have to choose between obeying God and obeying man, as the Apostle Peter once said in Acts, there's no question about it. We will obey God rather than man. Now, the fact that we are human beings and the fact that we carry the image of God also means that we carry certain inalienable rights, which the United States Declaration of Independence so explicitly refers to. The reason that we have inalienable human rights, the fact that we have any rights at all, is because we are human. And what makes us human, that we are not a monkey, we're not an ape, we are not a worm, a snail, we are not a plant, but we are humans. And that what endows us with human rights. The reason for that, of course, is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 27. God made man and women in the image of God. And that's why we become humans. Without that image, we are just a human-like. We are just Homo sapien, an animal, a very advanced animal. Maybe we can even think intelligently, but we do not have a soul, we do not have a spirit, then we are not human. We became human once we receive the Spirit from God. And that is inalienable. Nobody can take that away from us. Nobody can violate it. Okay, with those under our belt, let us look at a few key areas of ethical debate for the 21st century. These may have come and gone and appear in various forms over the millennia. Almost all ethical debates revolve around some of these areas, but in the 21st century, they have taken on new names, new titles, and new forms of expression. The first area is the sanctity of life issues, or bioethics. It has become a lot more complex, a lot more interesting in a way because of the advancement of biotechnology. And that's the what is a hot topic today in American politics, and that is the so-called identity politics. I would say that the entire LGBTQ plus issue is a form of identity politics. Also, what is so hot about this election, the 2020 election, presidential election, a lot of the tactics involved, especially being exercised by the Democrats is to take advantage of the so-called racial equality in the form of turning it into identity politics. You are so and so because you have the skin color, because you are male versus female versus male, because you come from a certain country. All these are identities, nothing to do with your political inclination, nothing to do with your value system, nothing to do with which party you belong to, nothing to do with your capability as a human being, but only to do with your identity, your skin color, your race, your ethnicity, and so on. And then, as I said, socialism is going to be a huge topic. It used to be a huge topic outside of America. In America, we thought we have it all sorted out. Not anymore. Especially with this past election, socialism has become a fashionable choice, has become a mainstream choice, advocated by the likes of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and even Kamala Harris. Biden disavows it on the surface, but if you dig a little deeper, his policies are now becoming more and more socialist. So it's worth our time to think a little bit deeper about that. But first, the big topic that has always troubled the Christian community for decades under the sanctity of life issues are issues such as abortion, of pregnancy surrogacy, of organ donation, genetic manipulation, and euthanasia. So you see, it's not only about abortion, although it is still one of the biggest topics. Now, surrogacy has to do with men playing God, including issues such as in the vitro fertilization, and the fact that now technology makes it so easy for you to select what kind of baby, designing babies. That's part of genetic manipulation. Surrogacy also greatly complicates the definition of parent-child relationship, because in theory you can have up to 5 different parents now. Okay, if the sperm and the egg is donated by a set of genetic parents, is being carried by a surrogate mother, and then after the baby is born, is being brought up by another set of caring parents. You can count 5 total parents in being parents of this child. Imagine the confusion it will lead to. And so that's exactly why we think surrogate pregnancy is ethically very troublesome. Okay, genetic manipulation is a huge topic, and organ donation. You may have read that the transplant medical technology has advanced so much to the point that a couple of years ago, some doctor even postulated performing, this is something like science fiction, a whole body transplant, or if you look at the flip side of it, it is a head transplant. Basically, they want to cut off the head of the patient and then prop that head onto another deceased human body, a full body, and connect the head to it. I'm not talking about science fiction. It is real. Doctors, a team of medical experts were actually planning on it a little over a year and a half or so ago. I have not read about whether they have made any progress. It is presumably to help a patient who is paralyzed from the neck down. But you may wonder if that kind of operation actually turns out to be successful. What kind of person would that be? Let's not even talk about the potential, the horrible suffering, the pain that is very potential. The risk is very real. But let's say all those issues can be overcome. What about the person's identity? A head transplanted into a completely different body. If the head of person A is plopped onto the body of person B, after all this is done, is that new person person A or new person B? There are more cells with the person B's genes in this new combo person than there are genetic makeups of person A. But then on the other hand, we feel that the human soul resides with the head, because the head is where all the memory goes. And so the experience of this person, this composite person, is still the experience of that of person A. Also, we will think. And if so, then the identity of person A prevails over person B. But let's not talk about that. That is just too messy. Okay, so for today, let's take a look at the basically 5-decade-old controversy of abortion. Even though it's been 47 years since the passing of Roe versus Wade in the United States, which legalized abortion in 1973, the issue has never gone away. Every year in March, there are tens and thousands of pro-life people marching in Washington, D.C. Every year, 12 months a year, there are states passing legislature trying to control or regulate various aspects the unregulated abortion industry. And every single day, the likes of Planned Parenthood, those who are for abortion, are fighting tooth and nail to try to keep abortion not only legal, but totally unregulated and without any restrictions, and of course with government money as well, because it has grown into such a huge money-making industry. And that is sad situation for America. But first, how should we approach this issue? Well, simply, you can think about it in three different angles. The scientific angle. As far as I'm concerned, the question of abortion it has two parts to it. One is determining when life begins, and that is purely a scientific question. The other aspect of it has to do with deciding when, if ever, it is acceptable to kill a baby. And that is an ethical matter. As far as the scientific data is concerned, the emergence of more genetic understanding of how genes interact, the fact that genes completely defines a person, that tells us that conception then is the only moment of significance in the entire history of development of the fetus. Because after conception, the entire genetic makeup, the entire genotype is complete. Even though it may be a lump of only 2 cells, only 1 cell, in fact, and 2 cells or 4 cells or 8 cells, or for a fully grown human adult, there are 100 trillion cells or so. Every single cell has the same DNA makeup in its cell nucleus, no exception. So the only moment that goes from a lump of material that is not living to a lump of material that is not only living but has the complete definition of a human being, and not only the complete definition of human being but the complete definition of a particular individual, all that happened at the moment of conception. So conception is the only genetically significant time marker. Life begins at conception. In 1973, when the Supreme Court invented the so-called privacy rights, and when they say that, okay, because this issue is too complicated, let's divide up pregnancy into 3 different trimesters. The first 3 months, it looks like a lump of cell, and it's certainly not viable if you remove the lump of cell outside the mother's womb. Therefore, let us say that we give the right of determination to the mother. The last 3 months, because it certainly looks like a baby, and if the baby is born prematurely, even in 1973, it already has a chance of survival. Now, with 50 years later, the chances of survival of even a 6-month-old premature baby, or even sometimes a less than 6-month baby, there are those who have survived. So we can no longer use this argument of viability to say. Now, for the middle 3 months, that's the second trimester, back in 1973, it is very, very hard to determine. And so the judges basically say that, no, we don't want to regulate that. Let the mother decide. But with the advancement of technology, more and more this viability argument, this threshold which is completely arbitrary, to set it between 6 months or not 7 months or 9 months. And now the Democrats, the liberals, they are pushing, and have successfully done so, to say that abortion should be kept legal even all the way to the second before the baby is born. And in fact, if the abortion happened to be not so quote-unquote successful and the baby was born alive, but yet the mother's intention was to abort it, well, the law should allow the baby still to be killed because of a botched abortion. That is just inhuman. That's insane to argue it that way. I hope you can see through the fallacy of that. Now, the liberals, especially the women's lib crowd, has also argued on the basis of the fact that, hey, the baby is 100% dependent on the mother, and during pregnancy, the baby is part of the mother's body. Therefore, we advocate women's rights, and the mother has 100% right to control what happens to her body. That is the prevalent argument for many years. But if you think about it, there is also a bogus argument. Is the baby actually a part of the mother's body? If so, then the mother, during her pregnancy, would be a person with 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 heads, 2 hearts, 2 sets of every organ, and even the baby, which has potentially a different blood type than the mother, is all considered to be part of the mother's body. And that's simply biologically not true. The baby is certainly not part of the mother's body. It is another human being, another human body. It happens to be living inside the mother's body, but dependency is not the same as being part of it. Okay, so we have to think clearly through these scientific data. But what about biblical proof text? You're probably familiar with the most cited Bible text, Psalm 139, 13 to 16. We are wonderfully and fearfully made. God made us. And even before we are born, we already have a human soul. We have a human spirit. How do we know that? Well, there are biblical cases. For example, John the Baptist jumped in his mother's womb, Elizabeth's womb, when Mary visited Elizabeth. That's recorded in Luke 1. And also in Jeremiah 1:5, God said, Jeremiah, even though you're not born, I have already set you aside, sanctify you, and set you aside to become a prophet to my people. So not only did Jeremiah have a soul and a spirit before he was born, he was actually given a life mission, a vocation before he was born. Okay, so how do we apply the hierarchical value model on this abortion issue? So let's recap. Guardianship of the fetus is not equal to ownership. So yes, even though the mother's convenience is important, but she does not own the baby. Okay, the baby is a human being, and it's not just a lump of cells. So dependency does not diminish the value of a person. In the same way that an elderly, maybe a chronically ill person, is also dependent on other people in helping him survive from day to day, but that does not diminish the fact that he is valuable as a human being. And thirdly, the most neglected principle in this debate is that, yes, to carry a baby to term may cause inconvenience, sometimes even hardship on the mother, and that's true. But if we have to choose, and then this clearly is a case of two conflicting values, the benefits of the baby versus the benefits of the mother, whose interest takes precedence? An often neglected principle, and in fact a principle that is upheld by democratic society, is that the strong has an obligation to protect the weak. In a democracy, it is not the strong overrides the weak. It's just the opposite, right? The majority has a responsibility to protect the interests of the minority, and the strong has an obligation to protect the interests of the weak. Let's look at two more examples very quickly. We cannot spend a whole lot of time on them. The LGBTQ plus issue. The scientific data is simply that gender is in the DNA, as you know, in our set of 13 pairs of chromosomes, and that is in every single one of 100 trillion cells in an adult. Every single cell has a nucleus. Every nucleus has a complete set of DNA. In this complete set of DNA, there are 13 pairs of chromosomes. And in one of these pairs contains the genes that determines our sex, the biological sex. We know that no matter what kind of operations that you go through, no matter what kind of counseling you go through, no matter what you do to your body, all your cells in your body still screams that you are a man or a woman, and it's not changeable. It's not changeable. Okay, no matter how you operate on yourself, every single cell still screams that if you're a man, you will still be a man. If you're a woman, you're still a woman. And nor do multiple genders coexist in the same person. We cannot say that, oh, as I grew up, I want to experience different kinds of a gender life, or the more I look at myself, the more I feel that I'm not a man, but I'm actually a woman. I want to live like a woman. No, that's not up to you. Biologically, scientifically, you are born a man or you're born a woman. Not either, not both, but only one of the two. However, let us not get confused. Gender role and sexual behavior is a choice. It's a choice. Okay, back in the 1970s and 80s, when the homosexual and gender first became politically a hot topic, the gay rights lobby were trying to argue that their sexual orientation is not a choice, but they were born with it. Well, their inclination may be born of it, but their behavior certainly is not born of it. Their behavior is a choice. And in fact, let's expand that to the overall gender role, whether you function more like a man in society, whether you function more like a mother at home, all these indeed is a choice. Okay, your biological makeup may predispose you to behave certain way, to predispose you to being more effective, far more effective in a certain role, but all your actions are still a choice. Therefore, you have a awesome responsibility, and in fact, if you want to change, you can change. Okay, so that said, the psychological and physiological attributes are interrelated. They are not separable. They are distinct, but not separable. Now, what about Bible text, proof text? Gender is determined, again, going back to Genesis 1:27. And secondly, the gender roles are complementary and are fixed by God. If you look at Genesis 2:18 and 24, how God created Eve of Adam, and Adam looked at Eve and said that this is flesh on my flesh, bone on my bones, and the two are complementary. Eve is going to be a helper to Adam, and that's why both Jesus and Paul quoted Genesis saying that marriage is God ordained, and ordained for the purpose of what? Primarily for the purpose of procreation. It's not for the enjoyment of the husband and wife. It's not even primary for the love of husband and wife. Marriage is primarily ordained for the purpose of procreation, for the rearing up of healthy children. And it is furthermore, marriage is a type for the church. Ephesians 5:31-32. So why are we seeing so much confusion, especially in the past 10, 15 years, about gender confusion, gender identity confusion? I think that is a deliberate rebellion of immoral people. Let's make no mistake about it. It is a deliberate, sinister rebellion against God. Go back and read Romans 1:24-27. Okay? So even though gender identity politics has become a key rallying call by the progressively radical agenda of the liberal left in this past 50 years, actually, that's nothing new. It's been thousands of years old. People want to rebel against God. They want to point a finger at God, said, God, you make a mistake. See, I want to dictate what kind of human being I want to live as. But God said, no, I'm sorry. I designed DNA. I designed the psychological makeup that comes with the DNA, and I designed the environment for men and women to live together in harmony, complement one another, and raise the children, be fruitful, and fill the earth, and hence accomplish God's plan of ruling the universe in the most ideal way. The last example we want to spend a few minutes on is the so-called socialism, globalism, convergence. Now, the reason I want to emphasize the word convergence is because in the past, we used to think that socialism has to do with the poor people, the proletariat rising up against the capitalists. And then globalism is mainly an agenda driven by the capitalists, and they don't like each other. They fight each other, and they still do. That's true. So on one hand, you would hear the likes of New York Times saying that they hate communism. But on the other hand, New York Times and the CNN and the like, they are pushing a form of globalism that the more you think about it, the more seems like they share the same objective as communist China. How did they come about? Why are these things actually converging? Well, at the risk of being a little bit simplistic, let me just state it like this. Socialism wants to achieve the stated goal of income or wealth redistribution. How do you redistribute? Who does the redistributing? The simple answer is that you need an authoritarian leader, or at least an authoritarian government. Authoritarianism always leads to elitism and tyranny. Why? Because it's just sinful human nature. You concentrate power in a few bureaucrats or a few dictators who control all aspects of life. They force you to give up ownership of your property, your wealth. They said that I would take 90%, 95%, 100% of what you own away from you and then redistribute it to everybody equally, or everybody whom I think they need, because that is the ideal of communism. But in the process of doing this, I, the distributor, would be gathering up all the benefits, all the power to myself, and I am just a sinful human being. Initially, I may only control the redistribution, the channels, but when I gather all this power, you can bet, I can guarantee you that I will start doing things that is for my own personal benefit. And so, no matter where you go in the world, look at mainland China. Okay, they are not even socialist in name. They are basically an elitist elitist country, because all the wealth of this huge country, which is becoming wealthy on balance, becoming quite wealthy on the whole. But out of the 1.4 billion people, a huge amount of power and hence wealth and benefits is concentrated in the hands of a few. And despite the name of being socialist, the concentration of wealth in China far exceeded the concentration of wealth in America today. So it is no longer a socialist society, it is an elitist society. What about globalism? It is another form of elitism, because in globalism, as the supply chain is globalized, and the multinational companies who are concentrated in the hands of a few people, a few investors, they are not only collecting the lion's share of the benefits in the country where their headquarters are based, by virtue of the fact that these countries are multinational, cross-national. These elites no longer just look at their own country, such as the USA, as the chessboard where they play out this game of gathering more and more monopolistic benefits to themselves. They look at the entire globe as the game board, and so they are slicing off the cream of the crop of the world's benefits, all the global's resources. They are gathering all the benefits to themselves across national boundaries, and so the elitism is no longer just concentrated in the United States. Look at the big tech. Look at the Facebooks, the Googles, and the Apples. They are making a huge portion of the money outside the United States, and so of course they are for globalization. They are for internationalism. They are for these so-called international institutions, not for the purpose of more equitability across the wealthy and the poor countries. No, that is not the objective of these institutions. These institutions is to keep this globalism machinery running so that these elites can generate more and more power, more and more wealth on their own. It's going to take a lot more time for me to explain it from the economics point of view. But this is, in a nutshell, basically what's going on in today. And that's why you see the middle class, the blue-collar workers of America rising up in arms, because over the past, especially the past 20 years, as China enters the WTO and becomes a major player in this globalization game, more and more the benefits accrue to the few who run these humongous international companies. And initially, people don't pay much attention because they say, oh, okay, the high efficiency of a globalized supply chain also bring us lower cost goods, and that is true. But after 20 years, that it becomes apparent that all the power has now been concentrated in the hands of a few in Silicon Valley, in a few multinational companies. In America, yes, also with a few in Europe, and also some in China. All the big countries are getting in on the game. Now, socialism, as executed by big government, is always a one-way street, and eventually it has to implode under its own weight. Many of you who study political science are familiar with this. One of the fatal flaws of a simple one-man, one-vote democracy is the so-called tyranny of the majority. Imagine this scenario. If you have 100 people voting, everybody has one vote. Sounds very democratic, right? But if I'm a skillful politician and I persuaded them that, hey, let's come up with a bill that said that everybody who's earning more than the mean income, so let's say 50 people out of 100 is making more than $50,000 a year, and 50 are making less than $50,000 a year. And I come up with a proposed legislation that says if anybody who makes more than $55,000 a year, all their property should be confiscated and be given to all those people who are making less than $55,000 a year. Well, guess what? I would always have a little bit more than 50 people who belong to the so-called poorer group. And so I will always win with this kind of legislation. And so I can always convince them, persuade them to vote for me because I'm for the poor people. See, I rob the rich to give the money to the poor. But as this kind of game keeps on going and playing out more and more, government taxation rate goes higher and higher, which is exactly what we are seeing happening in California today. And you may scratch your head and wonder why. No matter how high the tax rate goes, the government is always running a deficit. Well, because they are using your money to play this kind of power game. So they never have enough money, and they always have to promise 51% of the people more and more benefits at the cost of taxing more and more of the other 49%. And so it is a one-way street. When was the last time you ever heard of a government program canceling itself? Every time when LA County raises the sales tax, they always say it's for good cause, improve education, fix the streets, pay the firemen more, higher salary, build more parks. They would always say that, oh, let's do this. This is a recession year. Let's raise the taxes temporarily, and it will only go from 9% sales tax to 11% sales tax. And they say that, okay, it's only temporary. But when was the last time you heard that these temporary taxes expire and the government voluntarily revert back to the lower tax rate? Almost never. Okay? So socialism economically always implodes under its own weight. But what's more, it's also morally wrong. The Bible-proof texts tells us that, such as in 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, you look at the verses, the laziness is a curse, and those who do not work should also not eat. We should all work to feed ourselves. That's our human responsibility as individuals. If we have extra, we can voluntarily save it up to help others, including our own children. But the government has no right to force us to take away our property in the name of forcing us, coercing us to do charity. Charity, by definition, has to be voluntary. But if we are too lazy, we live on government dole, we are not trying to learn new skills when we get unemployed, then we should not be providing people like that with a safety net that never expires. Okay, safety net, social welfare has a good economic justification for it as a transitional means to help people learn new skills and adjust to new situations. But it should never be a permanent solution. Okay, I think we are out of time, so let me close with this familiar verse from Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? So here we find the three fundamental elements of living an ethical life: to do justice. That's when we see something that's unjust, unfair happening in society, even though the injustice may not directly impact our own personal interest, we should still be involved. We have to be an advocate of those who are weak, who are suffering because of injustice that's imposed on them. And then to love kindness is a reflection of God's mercifulness towards us. Because God is merciful towards us, likewise, we should be merciful towards our fellow human beings. And we should treat other people, especially those who are suffering, with kindness. We should do our share to bring them back, to give them the dignity, to give them healing. And then finally, to walk humbly with our God. That reminds us of the hierarchical priority that should be given to always submitting ourselves to the edicts, to the priorities of God. When what we design, what we thought to be good, actually conflicts with what God is telling us to do, we should always submit our own will unto the will of the Holy Spirit under God's guidance. That trumps everything else. So with that, let us close this portion of the seminar, and we'll open up to question and answers and free discussions.